Hi everyone, my name is Kristen. I am the Digital Marketing Specialist here at Dent Neurologic Institute, and I am joined by Sarah Harlock. She is the Program Director for the Dent Integrative Center for Memory. Today we are going to be discussing managing difficult caregiver emotions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we will address all questions at the end. So now I am going to hand it over to Sarah to start the presentation. Go. Okay, we're actually having some audio issues on her camera, so we're just gonna go like this.
All right. All right, we're gonna start again. I'm glad you're with us. We are talking about managing difficult caregiver emotions, and it is a subject that comes up regularly when we are talking in support group. It also is a subject that comes up regularly in our classes and even just in general conversation with our care partners here at Dent Neurologic. So a lot of times I'll ask the question, how are you doing? And the caregiver's response is very frequently, I'm fine, I'm fine. Sometimes it sounds a little bit more like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And you can hear it in the tone of their voice and the pitch, and you can just feel the tension. So a lot of times people are not prepared to talk about how they're feeling. They're not in the right setting to talk about their feeling, or they just, they're not comfortable talking to that particular person about how they're feeling. But I will say that the Alzheimer's Association's 2019 facts and figures paints a very different picture from I'm fine, I'm fine. And so some of the information that came out in that was really very striking this year. And we all know that caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease or dementia does pose some very special and unique challenges. And as a result, caregivers very frequently experience higher levels of anxiety and higher levels of stress and burden. And that has resulted in numbers that are really very, very important for caregivers to understand and to recognize. But 30 to 40% of family care partners who are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease or dementia are experiencing depression. And that's so 30 to 40% compared to 5 to 17% of non-caregivers. So being a caregiver to somebody who has Alzheimer's disease or dementia puts you at risk, a much higher risk for depression. It also puts you at higher risk for for anxiety and other chronic health issues as well. So it's really important that we are talking about emotions. And there are some very difficult emotions that caregivers experience through this journey of caregiving to somebody with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Some of those emotions include sadness or frustration or fear, anxiety, as we mentioned, certainly depression, but also some other things like guilt or also resentment. It's one that people don't like to talk about. They don't like to admit, but very often they feel resentful. They've given up a lot, and we'll talk a little bit more about that through this conversation as well. But getting to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, when you receive that diagnosis, it is very difficult. There's no question. And as a care partner to somebody with that diagnosis, it's hard to hear that information too, because your life changes then as well. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I want people to recognize that and to understand it. It can feel very heavy and very negative and so on, but it's not all doom and gloom. And there are moments of joy. There are some really important things that are going to happen along this caregiving journey. And so it's important to at least acknowledge those when you can. But you are going to learn new skills as a caregiver. Maybe you didn't take on the responsibility of the banking in your partnership with your spouse. And now all of a sudden that's become your responsibility. I've known a lot of male caregivers who have learned to cook for the first time at the age of 70 because their spouse is no longer able to prepare and plan the meals. And so they've had to learn to cook. So you are going to learn new skills all along the way. Also, you're going to meet new people. And I'm hoping that you will reach out and meet people either in person or online, but through programs in your community and through support groups and things like that as well. So there are going to be opportunities for you to meet new people. There are also going to be opportunities for you to change the relationship with people that you already know. So if you and your sibling are both helping provide support to your mother, for example, your relationship with your sibling may change, and I'm hoping for the better, but it may deepen and it may change as you both take on this role of supporting your loved one. In some marital relationships or partner relationships, we see that, you know, the two partners may have had very independent lives, but as one develops Alzheimer's disease or dementia, they become more dependent on the other partner. And that can change the relationship too. So your relationships are going to change. And I hope, as I said, for the better through this journey of caregiving. You will develop new strengths, things that you never thought you were going to learn, things that you never thought you were going to have to do. You will learn these things and you will develop quite a bit of strength from this. And also, I'm hoping a sense of satisfaction. When you have the opportunity, and I appreciate that it's hard when you're up to your eyeballs in caregiving, but when you have the opportunity, if you can step back and just reflect on all of the things that you have done and all of the things that you have learned and all of the effort that you have put into caregiving, I hope that you are as amazed by yourself as we as professionals are when we talk to you. It's really the depth of compassion, the effort, and the connectedness and the love that people are putting into this caregiving is really amazing. And I hope that at some point you have that opportunity to see those very positive aspects that you have demonstrated in your caregiving as well. So there is, you know, certainly some positives and so on in caregiving, but today we are going to talk about some of those more difficult emotions and so on. And I think it's really important to talk about those. Caregiving is a time of transition, and the disease doesn't sort of flick on with a switch one day and stay static. It's something that changes over time. And because it's changing over time, it's realistic to expect that your emotions will also change over time. And so again, I think that you need to be prepared for that. You may really be fine today, but be prepared that down the road, you may have some more struggles. This may become a little more difficult for you, or you may develop the supports that make you bounce back from this a little bit more easily too. So these emotions will change over time as the illness progresses and changes over time as well. But I think that it's important to recognize that emotions are signals. And if you're having some of these difficult emotions, it is a signal that you need to make some kind of change. And we're going to talk about some of those emotions, and we'll also then talk about some of the changes that you can make or implement that might help alleviate some of the difficulties. So there are two emotions that come up very, very frequently when we're talking about caregiving to people with dementia. And those two emotions are guilt and depression. And so I think we're going to spend some time talking very specifically about those, but we'll talk about some of the other emotions as well. Guilt is one of those emotions that's really kind of complex. There is a purpose for guilt. What it does is it brings our behavior in alignment with our moral compass. And if you can think of an example where you've done something wrong, you've wronged somebody, you've hurt their feelings, you've done something that, whether you meant to or not, it caused pain to another person. And I don't know about you, but I carry mine in my stomach, and I'll get that pit in my stomach. And I know that I've done something that doesn't fit with who I really think I am, or the better person that I should be. And so that pit in the stomach is that signal that, whoa, my behavior was not in alignment with my moral compass. I need to pull my behavior back in line. So that's where guilt can be really helpful. The challenge for caregivers is most of what caregivers are often expressing to me is what we call unjust guilt. You didn't do anything to cause this disease in your loved one. You didn't cause pain to this person. You did not wrong them. And yet, what you say you're feeling is, or you're experiencing, is this guilt. You feel guilty. And so this is what we call unjust guilt. You did not cause pain. You did not cause this disease, but yet you're still feeling this guilt. So it's really, sometimes we bring it on ourselves when we are feeling this guilt, and sometimes other people put it on us too. So it might be that other people expect us to do more than we can do. Very often, it's our own expectations of ourselves. It's that we think we should be perfect. It's that we think we should be able to get it all done in a day, and that we should not make any mistakes, and there should be nothing left undone, and we should have time to spend just enjoying our loved one as well. And the reality is that doesn't always happen. So again, our own expectations of ourselves is often what fuels these feelings of guilt. Oh, I didn't get the laundry done. Oh, my kitchen's a mess. Whatever it is that you don't feel that you accomplished in that day can give you that sense that you're not as good a caregiver as you think you should be. And that leads to those feelings of guilt. Sometimes, very commonly, I'll have caregivers talk about how they lose their cool. And maybe they yell back or they snap back at the person with dementia. And then they feel guilty about that. And we're going to talk about some of the ways to manage that and so on. But again, this guilt is a sign you're having an emotion. It's a sign that you need to be taking some steps and maybe making some changes here. But a lot of times your intentions are really good, but there is a limit to your time and your resources and your skills. And there seems to be this gap between the perfect caregiving experience and where you're at. And it's about becoming comfortable with that gap. None of us come into this job understanding exactly what we're supposed to do and doing it perfectly right off the bat. And so it's being comfortable with the fact that you may be less than perfect and accepting that. So really important that people understand that guilt is a very, very common experience for caregivers, and that a lot of times we bring it on ourselves. We either allow other people's expectations of us to drive that or fuel that guilt, or it's our own expectations. So being realistic about your expectations is important. When we do have those feelings of guilt, sometimes the easiest way to manage that, and I'll give the example again of a caregiver that maybe snaps at their loved one. And they didn't mean to snap, but there were 100 things going on and the phone was ringing and they were asking the same question for the 15th time in 30 minutes. And you had a moment and you snapped at them. Sometimes one of the easiest things to do is to admit the mistake and apologize. Sometimes the person with the cognitive impairment may not remember the incident. If if you're coming back to them an hour later and you're saying, honey, I'm really sorry that I yelled at you. I'm sorry. They may have already forgotten that instance, but you may still feel the benefit, that healing benefit of admitting your mistake and asking for their forgiveness. Okay, so there's never any harm in admitting your mistake and asking for their forgiveness in that situation. Correct the situation if you can. Sometimes it's that you need a little more support, or perhaps you need a little bit more of a break. That might be a way for you to be able to put yourself in a position where you can manage some of that stress around all of the responsibilities. So again, correct that situation if you can. Forgive yourself. You're human. You are going to make mistakes. You probably are going to snap at this person again. It's a pretty rare caregiver that only does that once, and so forgive yourself. We are all human. We all do these sorts of things, whether we are caregivers or not. And so I think being able to get over it and forgive yourself and move on is incredibly important. But I want you also to think about the forgiveness. And again, you may ask for forgiveness from the person that you feel you have wronged. But in some cases, that's not possible. They don't understand, or you're not feeling the benefit of asking for forgiveness because they don't remember the event. In that case, there are other ways of managing that and asking for forgiveness. If you are a person of faith, your faith probably has some practices around forgiveness. And so you can reach to those sorts of things. Other people will try other means. They might write a letter asking for forgiveness and then just sort of burn it or crumple it up and throw it away. But, you know, that idea that you're getting your thoughts and emotions out of your body and onto paper, or you're transferring, you know, your concerns to somebody else. But whatever those practices are, it's very appropriate to ask for forgiveness in different kinds of ways. But what I really want people to look at too is when they are feeling this guilt, is to really acknowledge whether or not this is just or unjust guilt. If you've just lost your cool and you've said something that was hurtful and so on, that's just. But if you're feeling guilty because you want to take half a day and go and meet your friends for coffee, but your loved one can't, that's not just guilt. Okay, so I think it's really important that you recognize whether what you're feeling is just or unjust guilt. And if it's unjust, stop beating yourself up for it. There are better ways to use your energy. And so I think that it's really important that you sort of recognize whether what you're feeling is just or not. The next emotion that people talk about, or situation that people talk about, is this depression, or this pervasive sense of sadness that people feel. And it's very real. As I'd said, the facts and figures statistics say 30 to 40% of caregivers of people with dementia will experience and suffer from depression. And I think that the studies consistently over time have shown that that this is true. This is not a new statistic. This is not a new fact. We've known this for many, many years. And so it's really important that as a caregiver, or even somebody who supports a caregiver, that you are aware and that you are sort of monitoring their emotional health and so on. I do remember a phone call from a couple, and she had just received the diagnosis, and you know, she was devastated by this diagnosis, but her husband was saying, I'm literally calling you from our bed. We're lying in bed. We can't even get up and start our day. And that's how pervasive this very heavy, heavy depressive feeling was for them. And so we immediately, you know, worked to get them hooked up with some services and so on. We also had a gentleman in one of our support groups who was very open and told others that he had recognized that he was not the caregiver that his wife needed him to be. And as a result of that, he spoke to his family doctor. And so there are some people who are very open in talking about how depression affects them, or that they are in fact feeling these feelings. So really important that you're aware of them. Not only is that statistic of 30 to 40% of caregivers suffering from depression really relevant, within of those people who are suffering from depression, there is a significant portion of them that actually qualify as clinically depressed and suffering from the diagnostic, or meet the diagnostic criteria of major depression. So it's not just these little feelings of blue, being blue and it passes in a day or so. We're talking some people are experiencing pervasive and consistent low mood and so on. It's really very significant. As well as suffering from the depression, it's important to know that also can put people at risk for other illnesses as well. And we very often think of depression as weepiness, or we think of it as just the crying. And it really can come out in a lot of different ways. And I think it's important people know that too. Sometimes it comes out in temper. We might see that somebody is really short-tempered, or it may come out as somebody not able to focus and complete the tasks of their day. You may get people that are, start a task and then they get, distracted and they start doing something else and they never come back to finishing their first task. Again, if that happens once in a while, it could, but if it's something that you just find you can't get through your day because you can't complete a task, that may actually be a sign of depression. And so again, really important that you understand that and that you are watching for things like that. So depression is certainly much, much more than simply crying or weeping. It's much, much more. So the things that you can do to help manage depression, the first thing that I recommend is that you talk to your primary care. I think that's really important, and I've had a lot of caregivers say that they don't want to take medication or something like that. And I said, that's okay. Talk to your doctor about that then. If you don't want to take a medication right off the bat, try other things, and we'll talk about some of those choices. But as I had related the story of the gentleman in our support group, he knew he was not the caregiver his wife needed him to be. And so he was very open about talking to his doctor. And he said, I started a medication. I didn't have to stay on it very long, but it got me over the hump. And then I could carry on with some other practices that helped me through all of this. So again, I think the first step should be talking to your primary care about it and making sure that they're aware of how you're feeling. Exercise is really important. So there's all kinds of evidence out there that talks about the impact of exercise on mood. And so I'm not saying that you have to, exercise for hours and hours a day, but just start moving and start with something that actually is enjoyable to you. It happens to be a lovely late spring day here in Western New York, and so it's a great day to go for a walk, even if that walk is just up and down your driveway. So if you can't leave your loved one and they're not able to join you on the walk, find a way to get some exercise, find a way to do some movement. Chair exercises are very appropriate and very effective. So if you have balance issues, again, you can still do some exercise. Just start moving. Additionally, your diet can play a very large role in how you're feeling. If your diet is heavily processed, if it is loaded with sugars, it's definitely going to have an impact on your mood and your energy levels. So where you can, you want to make sure that you're introducing fresh fruits and vegetables, and that you are trying to make your diet as healthy as you can, because that also will impact energy levels and mood. So finding moments of joy in your day. Sometimes it's really hard, and I've had caregivers really struggle with that. And there are different practices that you can try. I encourage you to try a gratitude journal. If all you can do is find one thing in your day that made you smile or made you feel good, then start with one thing, but work your way up, because I think once you start looking for those things in your day that made you smile, or things that just sort of made you stop and go, okay, then you'll start to see more of them. So whether that's a nice sunset, or whether that is something that your partner or your parent said that made you laugh, or whether it was reading something that in an article that was really funny. Just finding those things for which you can be thankful will help you see more of those in your day, and may help with your mood. Finding those moments where, whether it's just having a cup of coffee while it's still hot, instead of jumping up and running to meet everybody else's needs, you actually sit down and enjoy yourself for a few minutes. Or whether you take 10 minutes to read a book that you've been wanting to read. You may not get through a whole chapter. You may not get to read as many chapters as you'd like, but if you can actually spend 10 minutes and just do something for yourself, that may also help lift your mood a little bit. Call a friend or meet them for a cup of coffee or something like that. Also can help with your mood. Expect your mood to improve gradually. These are not things that are going to happen overnight. You're not going to write in your gratitude journal and feel immediately better the next day. But these are things that will change over time. And again, I think keeping your primary care in the loop about how you're managing this is really important. I would also encourage you to consider counseling. And so we have people that actually specialize in counseling, and some specialize in the very specific challenges of caregiving. And so those kinds of opportunities exist as well. Sometimes it takes that objective person to sort of help us get our thoughts out of our head and help us organize them. This is how I'm feeling. These are my goals, and this is how I want to get there. We can't always do that by ourselves. Sometimes we need someone to help us organize our thoughts and help us move forward with our plan. So again, I would encourage people to think about counseling as an option as well. I think too, it's important to notice that your sleep patterns could also play a very big role. So you want to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. And you also want to make sure that you're not isolating yourself, that you are getting some social stimulation, and that you are, still getting out there a little bit. You may not be as social as you were 5 years ago, but it's important that you still continue to get out and socialize with others. So there are a lot of different ways, and obviously, your doctors and other mental health care professionals will have ideas and approaches, but these are just a few ways that you can be thinking about how to manage depression and low mood and that sort of thing. So some of the other emotions that we talk about quite frequently in our classes and support groups and so on are things like fear, exhaustion, anger, and as I mentioned before, resentment. Fear, I find very often, is the fear of the unknown. And when people are experiencing fear, it's often because they don't know what's coming next. There's no way for us to know exactly what symptoms are going to show next. However, I find that if caregivers give themselves some education, if they go to some classes, if they look up their information from a reliable source like the Alzheimer's Association, then they're much more in tune with some of the changes. They're much more prepared for things that may come next. And so that fear is lessened. I'm not going to say it goes away completely for some people, but it's certainly lessened, and it's much more manageable when you at least know some of the changes that you might experience down the road. So education is really important in managing some of that fear. Exhaustion. I really wish that caregivers would learn early on how to ask for help. And it's something that, again, when you say, Dad, how are you doing? He says, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But again, they don't always know how to ask for help. And so it's okay to ask for help. You do not have to do it all by yourself. I say it's not a one-person job. So again, recognizing that it's okay to ask for help and actually learning how to ask for help are some really important skills that caregivers need to develop as well. Anger, again, if you're losing your cool and you find that you're losing your cool more and more, then again, I think that it's really important that that you recognize that as a sign. And maybe it means you need a little more support, or maybe it means that you need to give yourself a break. But know that it's something that is signaling you and letting you know that you need to make a change. And that frustration that caregivers talk about frequently is another issue. Again, you've made so many changes as a caregiver, and the person with the diagnosis has made a lot of changes as well. It's really not at all surprising that you get frustrated that they're not, able to do the things that they did 5 years ago. And again, if you're noticing an increase in your frustration, it's a sign that you need to make some changes, whether that's getting some education or whether that is attending a support group or something along those lines. And then the resentment, as I said before, people don't like to talk about it, but you can resent caregiving and still love the person you're caregiving for. So again, you might just resent the heck out of the fact that you are doing these jobs. It doesn't mean that you don't love the person you're doing them for. But again, acknowledging that and making sure that it's not spilling over into other aspects of your life as well is really, really important. So we've talked about some of the things that you can do to manage some of these emotions, but I just want to touch on some others. So acknowledging your feelings, we've talked about that. It's important that you not stuff them. We can be really great stuffers and we stuff down all those feelings, but they're going to come back one way or another. So sometimes it's just better to acknowledge them. It's okay to say, this was not the retirement your father and I had planned, and be a little angry about it. It's about loss. And so acknowledging that it's about loss is important. Then move on from it. But acknowledging those emotions is really important. Building and identifying your support network. So, whether it's your friends that you can call and say, wow, I had a really great day, or maybe I didn't have a great day, and just having a shoulder to lean on, or maybe it's the kids that come over because you looked a little tired last time they saw you and they want to come over and just spell you for a little bit and give you a break. But knowing that you have a support network and building that support network is really important. We talked about getting some education about the illness and the prognosis so that you're not surprised by changes that come along. There is also the issue of expectations, and we've touched on that. Dr. Laura Ray in our Western New York area had a great expression. She said, caregivers need to stop shooting on themselves, because we do it a lot. Caregivers will say, well, I should have done this and I should have done that and I should have handled this better. And her comment is, stop shooting on yourself, because it's not helping. And again, this goes back to the expectations. Stop putting unrealistic expectations on yourself. You're not perfect and you don't need to be. So forgiving yourself and being a good enough caregiver. Again, not worrying about the perfection, but being a good enough caregiver. My kitchen's clean enough, or, Dad has had enough socialization, maybe not as much as I wanted, but it's enough. Again, sort of thinking about this from a different perspective and recognizing that you don't need to be perfect. I think it's also really important when we talk about these difficult emotions that you understand that you can't control all of this. It's not, you can't control this illness. There are certain things within your control, but there are a lot of things that are not within your control. And so being comfortable with that is really important. And again, will help manage some of those emotions as well that you might be feeling. Other things that you can do, we talked about support groups, we've talked about classes. You can journal, you can use caregiver counseling. There are a lot of different places. There's a program out called Powerful Tools for Caregivers. That is a terrific class. If you just look it up, you'll find out whether or not they have them in your area. That tends to be a really enjoyable program. It's a time commitment, so it's not always doable for everybody, but it is a very, very effective program. So that's Powerful Tools for Caregivers. I also encourage caregivers to practice relaxation techniques. You know, if you find that you're in this and your blood pressure is really starting to get up there and you can feel it and you know, you can't walk away, then you want to start practicing techniques. And there are a lot of ways to get that information, but whether those are breathing techniques or whether those are meditative techniques, there are a lot of ways to manage your own emotions. And before things escalate to the point where you're going to have to ask for forgiveness, maybe you can stop yourself and calm yourself down again. It's just absolutely critical that as a caregiver, you are taking care of yourself. You are no good to the person you're caring for if you are not healthy. So again, just thinking about some of these techniques, and not all of them are going to work for you, but deciding which ones might be worth a try and which ones you want to look at and which ones you might try and give them a whirl. If they don't work, you try something else. But ignoring the emotions is not really going to be the answer. So finding ways to manage them becomes incredibly important. And again, recognizing that there has never been a need for you to be a perfect caregiver. You just need to be a caregiver who cares. And that's all anybody can ask. And so with that, I say goodbye, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day, and that the emotions that you're feeling start to shift into a more positive mode. And I look forward to seeing you again here at Dent Neurologic. Thank you very much. I do.
So Carol wants to know, how do you deal with burnout? With identifying it, when you feel like you can't caregive anymore?
Okay, great question. And a lot of times people don't recognize that they're experiencing burnout until there's some kind of health crisis. So they may end up in the caregiver may end up in the ER department with, you know, heart palpitations, or just so run down that they can't function and they become physically ill. So there certainly are signs and symptoms of burnout, and some of what we've talked about before, you know, these emotions, that pervasive feeling of sadness. Other signs could be not able to sleep, not able to eat, maybe weight loss, maybe weight gain, you know, but that knowing that things are just off kilter. And so again, a lot of the techniques that we've talked about here can help with burnout, but I think that sometimes we just reach the point where we recognize that this is no longer healthy for the caregiver. And so some people will at that time decide that they need to make a change. And that change could be having home health aides come in, or that change could be having your loved one move to a facility of some kind. Sometimes these are short term, where the caregiver can get their feet back under them again and get themselves healthy and well, and then add in some support systems that, you know, whether it's adult day and some respite programs and some home health aides that help take off some of the responsibility from that caregiver, and the caregiver can continue on. But if you've had, you know, chronic health issues, if you have tried some of these techniques and it's just not working, then sometimes it is necessary to consider placement of the person with dementia. So again, everybody goes through this a little differently. So it's tough for me to say, you know, these are the exact signs of burnout that you're going to see, but there are several signs of burnout. And I think, you know, if you look at your own health, your physical health, your emotional health, and your spiritual health, and how you're really coping. And from there, you can decide whether or not you need to add supports or whether you need to take a bigger step and look at placement or having them move in with another family member or something like that.
Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you everyone for watching. This will be available to watch later on YouTube as well as in Facebook, as well as